we are back with another analysis. This time we're doing The Searchers, 1956. It's a Western film directed by John Ford. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't like it. I didn't like it. I can appreciate it for what it meant in movie history and film history, but honestly, and like the good cinematography and the message, but I did not like this film. But that's okay. Don't have to like all of them. So, let's start this one off with a bang, huh? This movie is about a family in Texas, specifically Ethan, the main character, or one of the main characters anyway, comes home after 8 years of fighting in the Civil War with the Confederacy and also in the Mexican Revolutionary War, and he comes back to Texas to his brother's family. Long story short, he joined a group of rangers, and they heard about a Comanche threat, and they went to go investigate, and then they realized it was a trap. They came back. The family was, 3 of them were killed, and then 2 of them, the girls, the young girls, Debbie and Lucy, were taken. They were kidnapped. They were taken hostage. So, thus begins the mission of this entire film, to find Lucy and Debbie and bring them back. So, that doesn't go well a lot, honestly. And it's a really long journey to get there. Basically, they end up fighting the Comanche a few times, and then they run low on numbers, and then it just becomes Brad, Ethan, and Martin. Martin is a friend of the family who died and got kidnapped. So he was like personally connected with Debbie because he thought of her as like a little sister, and then Brad was connected with Lucy because Lucy was like his girlfriend, sort of. They had a thing. So yeah, they separate from the Rangers. So it's just Ethan, Brad, and Martin, and they go off. Eventually, Ethan comes upon Lucy's body, doesn't say anything until a little bit later, and when Brad finds out, he gets really, really angry, and he throws all logic out the window, and he rides into a Comanche camp and gets killed. So, from then on, it is just Martin and Ethan, and that is how it will remain. That's how they go. So, Martin and Ethan, winter happens in Texas, and they lose track of the Comanches. They lose track of the Comanches for a while. Time in this movie is a little weird. It's been a while since they originally were kidnapped, and so they head back to the Jorgensens, who is home to a few people that are important. One of which is Laurie. Laurie and Martin have sort of a thing going on. But anyway, they go over to the Jorgensen's house. They find out that there's a guy named Futterman who might know where Scar, the Comanche chief, is. And there they kind of like figure out his name, Scar's name. They leave like Laurie and everyone else, the Jorgensens, behind. They go try and do that. They get into some trouble with Futterman because Futterman tried to pull a fast one on him, and they kill him. So they move on from there, and they try and find Scar. And there's a time skip of about 1 year. Laurie receives a letter from Martin and kind of like details their weird adventures. Like Martin accidentally got a wife somehow, and like they find like soldiers. So, but then they find themselves in New Mexico. In New Mexico, they figure out where Scar is. Somebody tells them where Scar is, and they go and they find Debbie. At this point, it's 5 years after Debbie was abducted. So Debbie is an adolescent. She's older now. So yeah, Debbie is older. She's been raised by Comanche, and by that point it had been 5 years, so Debbie ended up becoming raised by Comanche, and when she's there, Martin tries to convince her to like come with, but she doesn't want to. She wants to stay with the Comanche. Ethan almost shoots her because he doesn't agree. He doesn't like that his niece was raised by a Comanche. He's super racist, and that has been shown throughout the film. And Ethan gets shot by a Comanche, so they have to kind of retreat. They end up going back to the Jorgensens, and what they find out is that Laurie is getting married that day to Charlie, some weirdo from the group. And they kind of intervene. Martin gets a chance to talk to Laurie. They kind of like sort stuff out. And they meet up back with one of the Rangers, Mose, and he tells them where Scar actually is. And so this time when they talk to Scar, because before they talked to him when they saw, Debbie. So yeah, this is the second time they encounter Scar. Martin goes in first, gets Debbie. He ends up killing Scar, and then Ethan scalps Scar. And Ethan, when he comes upon Debbie a second time, Martin is really worried that he's going to kill her, but he doesn't. He actually brings her over to the Jorgensen's house, and the movie ends with Martin and Laurie kind of like, fixing stuff, sort of, a little bit. And Ethan is like in the doorway. That's how it ends. So the plot, pretty standard. There was a lot of filler battles. Like, I feel like it was really long and drawn out because the search was so long, and they were trying so hard to find her. Like, they were dead set on it, and it was almost like unhealthy. Like, a lot of times I feel like they probably should have given up, but they didn't. So yeah, the themes of this movie, I think, obviously, like, race relations with the Comanche and the white people that lived in Texas. There were, they also, like, I think one of the major themes is, like, family, because a lot of times, like, Ethan is not really considering Debbie as part of the family anymore because she was raised by Comanche, because he's a really big racist, and doesn't think that she's, like, worth anything because she was raised by Comanche now. And also, like, he was judging Martin for thinking of Debbie as a little sister when they weren't related, but, like, that's not really how, like, family is not only blood, at least in my opinion. So those are sort of interesting topics. Obviously, like, the race relations thing, it was the biggest one. There was a lot of conflict between the Comanche and the white people and the Rangers or whatever, and that was depicted in a really weird way because, like, it definitely villainized the Comanche, for sure, but it also didn't make the white people seem very good either. Like, nobody in this situation really felt like a hero. Like, I guess maybe Martin, but a lot of times, like, it was a very morally gray sort of thing, and a lot of times, like, Ethan, the main guy, like, he sucked, like, a little bit. Like, he's a very interesting character, but I mean, like, just, like, morally. Like, he was super racist. He was willing to cut off Debbie at the slightest moment because she was raised by Comanche. He was judgy about Martin being, like, 1/8 Cherokee. And he has this, like, super big aggression involving the Comanche. He hates them. He hates them more than he wanted to kill the Comanche more than he wanted to save Debbie. So, like, that was his whole deal. So that was interesting because you see that kind of side of, like, the aggressive just hate over the Comanche, and that was not condoned in this movie, but it was shown. And then you see someone more like Martin, who's just trying to, like, obviously he just cares about his family and stuff like that. But neither of them were painted in a good light. Not sure if that was a great idea, but whatever. I think it was probably mostly made to entertain, but also bring awareness to an issue, because I think they raise a lot of questions about whether or not it's moral to be so aggressive to these Comanche, whether or not, like, that causes more problems in the end. There was also a sort of manifest destiny type thing, because they talked about kind of how they needed to civilize Texas and eventually it would be a good place to live, which is kind of like a weird racist mindset because, like, the natives were there first. And, like, that's understandable. They were hostile, of course, which maybe they shouldn't have been. But they were definitely there first. That was their land. It's just, I don't know, it's a little iffy. Obviously, it was made in the 50s. Like, it was, I understand that it was trying to be more progressive. And I think that it was more progressive for the time. Think that there were some missteps. Think that there was definitely some issues. There's definitely some racist stuff in there. Even if they didn't really mean to, it was still passively kind of messed up. The stereotyping in this movie was out of this world. Absolutely out of this world. There were so many stereotypes in every single regard. Even like with the white people. Just everybody. Stereotype. I don't know. I think it was made to entertain. I think it was like supposed to be just like a cool fighting thing. But it had like sort of awareness about, I think that they attempted to show like the harm and the obsessiveness and the wrongness of racism and like extreme aggression towards natives in the way that Ethan hated the Comanches, because he was depicted as obsessive. He was depicted as kind of just not blindly, he had a reason for it, but he was like so aggressively racist towards them, which I think was uncalled for. Even if he had bad experiences, even if he had bad experiences with the Comanche, I don't think that it justifies everything that he wanted to do to them and everything that he did do to them. So that was interesting, kind of like showing commentary through there, and also through Martin, because Martin didn't condone that a lot of the time. Martin was a lot more accepting. He really didn't think that just because Debbie was raised by the Comanche that that she was a bad person anymore. Like, he didn't think that the Comanche deserved like as much aggressive. Like, Ethan shot one of the Comanches that was dead, like just in the eyes, because he knew that in their religion that meant they weren't going to heaven. Like, that's messed up. Like, you don't do that. I think that Ethan was an anti-hero. I think that he, even though he didn't end up like saving the day a little bit and a lot of it, and doing, kind of good, he definitely has some iffy morals. He's kind of like a messed up character a bit. He was really obsessed with this chase. He wanted revenge, and I think that the things that he was willing to do for revenge were messed up. I already said, but there are so many stereotypes in this movie. I can't even count them. It's just stereotype after stereotype. There's like the natives and the way that they act and the way that they dress and the way that they everything. And then there's the making fun of that too. Like, I know that Mose a lot of times was making fun of them, and their calls and their war cries. There was the Spanish stuff where, like, it was just stereotypical. Like, everything was really stereotypical. And I get that was, like, partially so that you would understand the different cultures and the different everything. They wanted them to be as different as possible. But also, I don't think that it was a very accurate or non-stereotypical portrayal. Even with the Jorgensens, you see that. I think that the complex characters of this film were Ethan and Martin for the most part, and I think Laurie had some complex emotions in there too. Ethan and Martin, again, I've talked about Ethan a bit, but Ethan, he's got some weird morals. He's kind of an anti-hero. He tried to shoot his niece. Like, that's rough. I think that was important. I think that Martin, being a 1/8 Cherokee, also probably helped him think a little bit less ill of the Comanche and that sort of thing. I think his life experiences, he was just a little bit more of a gentler person. Yeah. So as far as direction, I think that this film was very well directed. I know that John Ford has done incredible things, and he's done incredible things with this movie as well. I didn't like the pacing, though. I'm not gonna lie. I also just don't have the biggest attention span, so maybe that's me. But man, this went so slow. It just was. It was so slow. There were so many moments. Even the dialogue was given so slow, and everything dragged out a lot. And I think that part of that might have been purposeful because you needed to understand how long the search was, how how arduous everything was. But man, it was kind of painful. There was just like fight scenes and just random like scenes where they would just be like looking and not finding anything. And I understand the point, but maybe it could have been a montage. I don't know. So yeah, I don't know. I thought the pacing was pretty slow. I did like, I thought the story, in terms of like the actual story, it was very straightforward. The entire time, I was never really confused about what the story really was. Maybe I was confused sometimes about like where things were going. But for the most part, like it was just the whole time you were pretty sure, alright, they're looking for Debbie. And they don't like the Comanches. And they stole her, so that's the plot. Is just looking for Debbie, find Debbie. Which is good. I think it's good that I was able to follow it. Like it wasn't hard to understand in any way. There was certainly so much conflict. There was a lot of conflict. Even in like there was conflict between Martin and Ethan. There was conflict between the Comanches and the group. There was conflict between Laurie and Martin. There was conflict between even like actually the environment. Like sometimes the terrain was difficult or the like snow would get in the way. Like there was a lot of good conflict here that made this movie what it is. It's very good. Technically. It's technically very good. It's got a lot of great conflict. It's got a lot of great gunfights. There was a lot of suspense, obviously, because it was 2 whole hours trying to get Debbie. Like, the whole time, you're kind of, like, waiting for it, and then the ball drops, you know? Yeah, I think there was a lot of tension in a lot of different places, because when something new would emerge about, like, kind of the situation and how certain characters felt about certain things, there was definitely some tension. Like, Martin really didn't like that Ethan almost shot Debbie, and they had a lot of arguments about that. There was a good amount of tension. There was a good amount of suspense. There was a good amount of conflict. It was a good movie on a technical note. I just personally didn't enjoy it. Again, I want to be very clear. It wasn't racist. It's not that the film was racist. It was explicitly trying not to be racist. But it was also the 50s, and it was kind of hard to do that because people didn't really grasp what was racist and what wasn't. So there were some rough around the edge kind of things regarding that. If this movie was made today, there would have been a lot of criticisms about the way that they portrayed some stuff. But, that's just that. Yeah, so moving on, the music. I will say, the one thing that I will say that I really, really, really actually loved about this movie was the music. I thought that it made the movie. Like, this movie wouldn't have been anything. It wouldn't have been anything without this music. Like, of course the cinematography, of course the plot, of course the direction, but man, it always does it for me as a score. Like, the score, it has to be good or else the movie is just like, it falls flat. So, with this movie, it was incredible. Like, they did a bunch of, like, obviously, like, Western-themed battle music for a lot of this. There was a lot of, like, dramatic twinges, and there was a lot of, like, some real jams, that kind of helped pass the time a little bit through the long, like, just environment scenes where they were just, like, going through the desert. Like, that really got me through it. I think that it fit with the mood perfectly. It absolutely encapsulated that, like, Western theme. It was the right volume. Like, it added so much. It added so much, like, suspense and tension and build up to all the scenes. It added meaning where it needed. Like, it was good. It was great. And everything was timed super well. So yeah, score, excellent. Absolutely stellar work on that one. And now we're on to cinematography. Cinematography for this movie was very, very good. And it's probably one of the biggest strong suits that this film has, because, I mean, obviously John Ford is known for having some pretty banger cinematography, and this was no different for this movie. The Searchers had a really good one. I know that we discussed this in class, but, like, the motif of having the doorway and having that frame the shot several times throughout this film was really good. I think it really it was a really interesting way of telling the story. You know, it ended in a doorway, and I believe it started in a doorway too. So that's really neat. I thought that was really interesting and a very fitting way to end this film is with Ethan just like on the porch, backlit by the desert in a doorway. I think that makes so much sense. And then walking out, like that's perfect. I think that like there were so many shots that were really aesthetically nice. Like there was one I'm remembering right now where there's horses lined up, like when they're getting surrounded by the Comanches and horses, where the Rangers are on the foreground and the Comanche are on the background, and they're like, you can see the parallel between them, and that's really really neat as well. There are a lot of good like establishing shots and like real big, wide, like landscape type shots that are really really pretty because the desert is beautiful. So they did some really good shot there. The action was shot really well. I thought I could follow it pretty well. You could really understand the flow. It flowed really good. The camera moved smoothly. Everything was framed really beautifully. Honestly, I think that there was a lot of purposeful framing. Again, like the door frames and the way that people were placed in certain ways, the way the angles hit. You know, there was some good cinematography in this film. With production design, again, these sets were great. I thought that the sets were really good. They looked really lived in, and they looked very in theme with everything. They were very Western, and in very different ways too. Because obviously there was like a house by like white people, you know, whatever, and then there was like the Comanche camps, and then there was like the Mexican bar, or not the Mexican bar, but the Mexican restaurant maybe, and like Futterman's Place, the Jorgensens. Everything had a very distinct Western feel, but also had like its own separate theme sort of to it, because you could tell kind of like the differences, and it showed through the architecture and through the production like design how different these people were, like the outfits, everything, the houses, just everything kind of like showed the division and also showed the unity, which was really nice. I think that you could definitely tell who was who in this. Like, if they weren't a part of a certain group, you could tell from a mile away because they were dressed very differently. And the Mexicans, they had like the big sombreros, just everything. Special effects. I think the special effects for this movie, obviously gunshots, I say that every time when we were talking about special effects because it's like the most obvious one to me. I think also there were special effects when Ethan got shot in the shoulder. Also, like, that one guy got shot in the beginning, sort of. Not in the beginning, like 45 minutes in. There was one guy from the Rangers that got shot. I'm not gonna lie, I don't think the special effects were all that great when it comes to like wounds. I thought the gunshots were fine. They seemed very realistic to me. I don't know what guns look or sound like, honestly. I've never been near one, but they looked realistic to me. They looked accurate. They looked 1950s. They looked excellent on the gunshots. The wounds, not enough blood. I'm still thinking there's not enough blood. It just didn't seem real. Like, especially the guy that got like injured. One of the Rangers that got injured by the Comanche during one of the first few fights. He was like badly injured and they like laid him down and everything, but I didn't even see the injury he had. Like, straight up, I did not see it. I couldn't tell where he was hurt at all, which I don't think is very good. I think you have to be pretty clear about where these people are being hurt. So yeah, the special effects on the wounds maybe weren't as great. Editing was normal. It was pretty good. There wasn't anything that I considered, like, I thought was like choppy or jumpy or anything. I think the transitions for this film were pretty good, actually. I think there were some like fades and some nice stuff. Obviously, I'm gonna do it every time, and it's gonna be annoying every time, but not the level of Rope. Rope has some pretty clean transitions. They're very good to me. Um, so like maybe not rope style transitions, but they were pretty good. So yeah, like it was good. It was normal. It was fine. The pace, I talked about it a little bit when I was talking about direction, but the pace was so slow. Like, I think there was stuff in there that I didn't need to see. There were some battles in there that weren't really necessary. There were some things that could have been explained with dialogue or title cards. Man, how I would have loved some like title cards in here to be like 5 years later. So I know they like said it with background, but I would have liked a little bit of explanation. Just so I didn't get a little lost. I never got lost with the plot, but I did get lost with like time a little bit. It was just slow. Like I think the dialogue was slow. I thought the pacing of this was slow. I thought the walking through the desert was slow. Like it just was slow going, which I think again probably was intentional because it was such a slow, arduous, difficult, obsessive, annoying like search for all these for the girl, for Debbie. So that makes kind of sense. You know, I don't think that doesn't make sense, but it was just a little hard to get through, honestly, without getting a little distracted because of the pacing. It was organized though. I mean, it was organized and there wasn't like certain scenes specifically. It was, I mean, because maybe it's just that they needed to be shorter or they needed to be more concise or they didn't need to show the absolute entirety of a battle. You know what I mean? Like, I think that it wasn't specifically that they didn't need to have the scenes, but that the scenes were slow in and of itself. And lastly, we have dialogue. I think the dialogue for this movie was good. I think, although it was slow, and that is the only thing I will say, it was slow and a little rough. When I was watching the ending on my own, because I didn't want to wait, I sped it up 1.5, because ouch. But yeah, I think the conversations were interesting. They handled interesting topics, like again, like they were talking about like race relations, and they were talking about Comanche culture, and they were talking about a bunch of different topics and sort of issues concerning the West. Because again, at the time, like not at the time that this was made, but at the time that this was set, there were a lot of problems regarding natives and the people wanting to move to the West and manifest destiny and whatnot. And that conflict was really well described in the dialogue, as well as their actions. But the dialogue really made it good. I think that it did bring context. It was the only thing that brought context to the plot developments was the dialogue, because the timing of everything required dialogue in order to understand. Because as much as like 5 years is a while, the only person that ended up aging in 5 years was Debbie. Because Ethan and Martin looked exactly the same. There's no indicators of any sort of like changes. So you really had to be like, okay, this was a while. And only when someone would say, oh, it's been 5 years, that I knew it was 5 years. And yeah, and there was always like, there was a good line that that Ethan kept saying, like, that'll be the day. Like, I think that that's very representative of who he is, because he's very stubborn in what he does. So anytime he's like, oh, that'll be the day, like, he's saying, like, oh, yeah, it's kind of like when people are like, when pigs fly. Like, he's sort of saying that, like, sure, whatever, when that comes true, like, who cares? So he's got that like bit of dialogue that he repeats over and over again, which I think is very intentional and very in character for him. The dialogue, they matched the tone, they matched the personality of the people. I think they were overall pretty good. So yeah, this movie was on a technical level, this film was very good. I understand why it got all the awards it did. I understand why it has all the praise. I understand why people love it so much. I didn't, though. And that's just sort of my personal opinion, though, because I'm just not super into, I think it's just the Western genre, the, like, hero, the fighting the natives, the slow pacing. It wasn't for me. So, that's my piece on this film. The Searchers, overall, a good film. Didn't like it, but that's fine. So yeah, that is all. I'm gonna go ahead and head out. Sorry this one was a little late. I got super busy all of a sudden and couldn't do this until right now. So yeah, have a good one. See you next week probably.